This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Welcome to Uncorking a Story, the podcast that introduces you to the rich world of storytellers who share their personal journeys, creative processes, and the stories behind their stories, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and I'm thrilled to be part of your writing journey. If you're an aspiring writer, a literary enthusiast, or simply someone who believes in the transformative power of words, you've come to the right place. Every week, we'll pop the cork on the world of successful storytellers and give you a healthy pour of inspiration, insight, and empowerment. My mission is to help writers like you realize your full potential through the transformative and therapeutic power of writing. Whether you're just starting your literary voyage or looking to refine your craft, I'm here to provide you with the knowledge, inspiration, and encouragement you need to embark on your own storytelling adventure. So, are you ready to uncork your story and let your creativity flow? Uncorking a Story is about to begin. Sit back, relax, and let the transformative magic of storytelling whisk you away. Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Reginald L. Reed is an author and an accomplished professional in the pharmaceutical industry. He joins me today on Uncorking a Story to discuss his memoir, The Day My Mother Never Came Home, in which he recalls the events surrounding the unsolved murder of his mother and the subsequent indictment and trial of his father 32 years later. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Reggie.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I know it's early where you are, but I'm curious. Where does your story as an author begin?
Well, it all started when I've been basically followed by my mother's tragedy all my life. When she was murdered when I was 6, and over a course of time throughout my life, things just kind of settled in and the case went cold. But a few years ago, I got a strange call from local law enforcement in Louisiana stating that my father was indicted for the murder, which was very shocking, if you could imagine. And that's when I just said, you know what, the story was out, a lot of media attention. And at that point, I said, the only way to combat this now as an adult is to write about it, and really tell my own story. So I just took on the task and built up the courage to just get a pen, get some paper. I'm saying that old school, but literally, I got some pen and paper and also my computer and just start writing away.
So I think we have to take a trip back in time here. So if you allow me to use a Back to the Future reference, we have to get into our DeLorean and go back in time a while. Tell me what was your life like during that period of time? I mean, you're 6 years old, and I mean your mother leaves one day and doesn't come home. What was that like growing up?
Michael, as I can remember, it was very chaotic. At that age, you really trying to decipher what's really going on. I recall myself viewing an interview, maybe a month after she was murdered, with one of the detectives, just kind of giving me some, questioning me about that night. And one of the questions she asked was like, who's currently at your house? And I paused, I was going through the list. I was like, my dad, my dog. I had a golden Labrador named Duke. I was like, Duke. And then when I got to my mother, I kind of looked at my dad and was like, and my dad was like, no, she's there in spirit. So to your question, it was just very chaotic, very confusing. And it just seems like life, just looking back, life just molded itself and just kind of took literally a life of its own without my mother present.
I mean, did you at that time have a sense that she was, gone for good? But like what, just paint a little bit more of a picture of like, what was happening.
Yeah, I don't. And again, I look at my son now, he's 4 and he's a mama's boy, right? When mama goes to the store, he's like, where's mama? And I take myself back in time. I'm like, just most recently, just kind of think about what I was thinking at that time because I really wasn't sure. I when the news first broke, I think my emotions were kind of carried and they kind of latched onto my the people I was surrounded by emotions. Because at 6, you really don't know. I'm not hearing that she was murdered. She was found in a car with over a dozen stab wounds. I'm not hearing all these graphic details. I'm just knowing that she didn't come home.
Yeah.
And I think after the funeral, maybe I had a little bit more clarity. But like I said, as time unfolded, I just noticed that she was not present anymore in our lives. And it was just my dad and I think the realization eventually came to light, if you will, just for me realizing that she's never coming back.
Yeah. Did you have no brothers and sisters or only child?
Yeah, not at that time. My dad never remarried. I was the only child from my mother and father. Later, I had other siblings, but they're basically step siblings.
Got it. So now we're going to go forward in time, and you're an adult, and you get this call. Was that the last thing you thought? You pick up the phone, and all of a sudden you've got this news that your father's been indicted. Was that the last thing that you thought that call was going to be about?
Well, yeah. So let me just step back a little bit.
Yeah,
So
please.
throughout years of my life, I was raised, my dad and we lived in a small, quaint community in Hammond, Louisiana. The neighborhood we lived in was 100% African American. I was raised humble beginnings, and I could count on maybe 2 hands. You hear these rumors, as they refer to it as street talk or gossip. You hear these things and, I just, as a kid, I'm trying to be a kid as much as possible. And I heard a couple times, that my dad had something to do with it, but I just kind of brushed it off, and just really didn't pay it any attention. But back in 2010 is when I moved to San Antonio. 2 years after I had, made myself home in a new city, I got a knock at the door. Like after a long day at work, maybe 5:30, I got a knock at the door. It was a Texas Ranger who is like the state troopers in the state of Texas. So obviously I felt uneasy then because I'm thinking like, why is a Texas Ranger with a cowboy hat at my door? I'm thinking like, what did I do? What did I didn't do? I'm thinking I'm in trouble. And I kind of felt he was uneasy as well. But he, long story short, he introduced himself and I invited him in and he just like, I just want to ask you a few questions about your mother's murder. And I was like, I was shocked at that point. Like, why is this all of a sudden coming back up? And he just showed me a couple pictures and asked me a few questions and so forth. So at that point, I was like, oh, I guess they're just kind of re-evaluating the cold case. Because at that time, the case was cold. So fast forward a few years ago, again, I'm working and I was actually at a hospital working. I had a meeting and I get a call and it was basically quote unquote a courtesy call from the law enforcement in Louisiana saying your dad has just been indicted for the murder of your mother. And right then time just stopped, if you can imagine. Like, yeah. I was like, is this a prank or like, why would somebody prank like this? So it was just time stopped. And again, my world, my life has been flipped upside down.
Yeah, I'm curious about the presence of the Texas Ranger because the the murder happened in Louisiana, right?
Right. So I give you a little context. What happened was, and all this was unfolding in the background, and I didn't have any idea that it was being looked into again. So at that time, I think a major hurricane was approaching Louisiana, but the initial goal was for the Louisiana state troopers to fly out to Texas to meet with me. But based on the weather conditions prohibited them from coming out. So they coordinated with the local law enforcement, which was Texas Rangers, and like, hey, can you meet with this guy? This is what we're working on, so forth, so forth. And that's what brought the Texas Rangers into the picture, because when I met the gentleman, he asked me a few questions and asked, would I be willing to come down to the substation for a more formal interview within like the week or so. And I agreed to that. But one thing was weird is that they wanted to do like a hypnosis interview. I didn't agree to that. I thought that was kind of strange. I'm like, no, I get weirded out about that type of stuff. I'm like, I don't want to get hypnotized and never come back to my real self. I'm like, so I passed on that, but I did do just a regular interview, just kind of talking about what I remembered back then. So anyway.
Right. And that's where we're talking like 30 something years before you're in there. You're trying to.
Yeah. They asking me like, so what do you remember about that day? What did y'all go to the mall? Was your dad in the car? Was there any certain smells you remember? This is all detective work, right? This is, like you see these shows, First 48, and, the good thing is I wasn't the suspect. I'm like, so, right. So I felt more at ease, but it's still uneasy because, I don't remember, one thing I remember that sticks out that my dad and I was at home playing Nintendo. As a 6-year-old, I was big on video games. We were playing Nintendo. I think it was like a baseball game I had just recently got, and we were playing Nintendo and fell asleep, woke up. Mom wasn't there.
Wow. So I have to ask about your dad. Like what you get that call, your dad's been indicted. Did you have a conversation with your dad after that? Do you have a chance to talk to him or?
Yes, I did. Obviously after the process of the intake process, if you will, of the jail, maybe it was close to 48 hours. I finally received a call from the jail, and it was my dad. And my dad's a Marine. He doesn't break or bend under pressure. All my life, that's what I know my dad as. Like he does not let you see or anybody see him sweat. So I'm like, the world could be falling apart and he's still like even keel. Like he's just like, hey, it's okay. So that's what the initial conversation was like. And he kind of gave me some suggestions on like who to reach out to and so forth, just like some people that he knew like locally, just to kind of get more information. And time just kind of went on. And before you know it, we're 11 months in and he's still in jail with a $250,000 bond and awaiting trial. And I do want to point out, like, this was in the midst of COVID, so what I did, 250,000, I'm not, when they put a bond of that capacity on you, that means they don't want you to get out.
No.
So, and typically the bail bonds require 10% of that. So I was able to move some things around financially, and I just I was with the thought process that, my dad's old, it's COVID. You hear all these stories how bad COVID is in jail. So you know what? I can eventually make more money, but if something happens to my dad, I can't get my dad back. So I was able to, move some things around from a financial standpoint and bail my dad out after about 11 months of sitting in jail and have him get prepared to fight his case outside of jail versus inside.
Yeah. Wow. I can only imagine, the trauma you felt at 6 and then having it come right back to you, 30 or so years later. What was the trial process like?
But besides the fact, when my mother was murdered, that was like the second worst day of my life. I would say it's like the worst day of my life because, as an adult experiencing something like that versus a 6-year-old, just like we spoke about earlier, it's just you're trying to put the pieces together as a 6-year-old. You're trying to understand what's really going on. But as an adult, seeing your dad, my father who raised me, get sentenced to life in prison is, I can't really, put a word on it, but it was one of the worst days of my life. The trial lasted for right at a week, and throughout that time period, I recall my dad and I building up a quick tradition. It kind of reminded me of when I was younger, before school. I went to a Catholic school. The bus didn't come in our neighborhood, so my dad had to take me to school every morning and pick me up. But one of the things we had going was we'll go to McDonald's, maybe 3 times out of the week, sit there and eat, and he'll bring me to school. And throughout this weekend trial, that was we quickly established this routine where we'll drive to a city right outside of Hammond, which is called Amite. That's where the parish courthouse is. And we'll stop at McDonald's, get a bite to eat, and then head to trial, head to court. I didn't really have a big appetite, so I just got like a hash brown or something. But we did that consistently from that Monday all the way up until that Friday. And the worst part was when they read the verdict, and, again, my knees locked, time paused, and they read and I just I was just kind of in a stare, just looking at my dad, and then the bailiff coming over, putting the handcuffs on my dad taking out his belongings. And I just reverted back to emotionally of when I was a 6-year-old. It was a point when I was watching that video that I spoke about earlier where they were questioning me, and I just had an outburst and just was crying and said, I want my dad, I want my dad, I want my dad. And my dad was in the room. And during this trial, that's what happened. Like, I went up, the attorney kind of waved me up, said, hey, you want to say bye to your dad? And I went up, and that's when I just lost it.
Yeah.
He hugged me, he kissed me on the forehead and said, it's going to be okay. Again, the world's falling, and he's telling me it's going to be okay. I'm like, whatever. And I just recall myself just crying, and they escorted me out because I was just way too emotional. And I was just saying, I want my dad, I want my dad, I want my dad. And that was it. And one of the other worst parts is driving home, without my dad in the car that night. Like, that was weird. It's like every day we're driving together. We come home and I drop him off at the house. I was staying with a friend, but that Friday night, after 3 hour um, deliberation of the jury, and after everything settled, I went home. My dad wasn't there, but his scent was still in the car.
Yeah.
It's cologne, and it was horrible. I don't wish this on anybody.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. So when do you start thinking about writing a book about all of this, and memorializing it?
Just really when everything just came out as far as the indictment, and I knew that, okay, things are getting real, and people calling me. I'm looking on social media, Facebook, local media's putting stuff out, former candidate for mayor, because my dad ran for mayor of Hammond, and they put on these headlines: our former mayor candidate indicted for wife's murder, and blah blah blah, and people commenting. It's haywire. And these days, it's like it just literally, a story just takes off like wildfire, right? And I'm just like, man, I have to find a way where I can, a process that helped me heal through this, because I knew this was going to be a rough ride. And for all my life, it's like I've I guess housed my own story, my own feelings, and how I've dealt with trauma throughout my life. And something just hit me, say, you know what? And this is my first book. I'm not an author. I was like, and actually, I'm not a big reader, and I was like, I don't know how to write a book. I don't know what to do. So I just kind of did some research and just built a team, I hired a copy editor, hired a writing coach to help me kind of put everything, contextualize everything. And I just got to work.
In what ways, if any, was the writing process therapeutic for you?
Just really, all my thoughts and all my feelings, just basically putting it out there, just kind of releasing it, because things like this, I have my wife, which is, she's been the ultimate support system. But just as a man, it's like some things, it's like you don't want to appear as weak, and some things, you want to talk about, but you don't want to talk about because you're afraid of what somebody's going to think. So that's why I just say, I'm just going to just take on a task. And like I mentioned earlier, I just built up the courage to just really put it all out there and just really tell my story. And by writing, and throughout that process, I'm talking about it. I'm talking more to my wife about it, telling how I felt at this moment, and so forth. And that was just the, I guess, the motivation for me to complete this memoir. And, it was a very cathartic process. You hear people say, oh, you don't hold in your feelings. You got to talk about it. I've been to counseling before, like throughout the period when my dad was awaiting trial, and I talked about it, and that helped, a little bit. But I just went down this road, and here I am. Now I have a book, and I just one of my main goals is just encourage people in general. Just you gotta tell your stories. We're in a time of the social media days. You pull up, all you're seeing is positive stuff. Everybody's taking trips. Everybody's life is great, right? But I just want to encourage people, like, you got to tell these types of stories, because you never know who you could help. Because someone could be going through something far less worse and hear my story and be like, you know what? I'm doing okay.
Well,
I'm not doing
right.
that bad.
You're right. I think there's a lot of people walking around thinking less of themselves because they go on to Facebook or Instagram, and they see these people living these glorified lives. Um,
Yes.
and they think, hey, my life isn't like this. What's the matter with me? But it's not as if Instagram and Facebook are actual mirrors to ourselves. It's
Right.
basically the false reality that so many people are living. But at the same token, I imagine this is a book you never really wanted to write.
Yeah, it was. You're right. So I would say if things wouldn't have unfolded the way they did, I probably would never wrote a book.
Yeah.
You know, but hindsight, things happened the way they did, and this was one of the only ways I saw that I can like combat the trauma because I wasn't, and that's how I've really been my whole life. Just and that's one of my motivations outside of my family is just realizing the things I was without growing up, the things I didn't have, the things I didn't want, and the stages of life where I wasn't happy. And I said, you know what? I don't want to relive that. I don't want to relive that trauma. I want to do better because at the end of the day, it's all up to the individual. It's all up to you, me, to determine how we want our life to be, and I took the high road and just said, you know what? I'm not gonna, because I was telling somebody the other week, I said, you know what? If I would have ended up on drugs or maybe alcoholic or whatever, I would have had a pass. And what I mean by that, they would have looked at me, and I say they, people would have said, you know what? I see why he's the way he is because he's been through so much. His mom was murdered and this and that and that. And I didn't want to fit into that statistic. I wanted to change the narrative of that.
Yeah. I mean, they do say, by they I mean these experts, um, trauma begets trauma, and
Hmm.
it's a cyclical thing. But it sounds like you made a very conscious effort. And I know you mentioned you have two young kids at home, to sort of break that cycle, if you will, so that they don't have
Yes.
to experience what you had. And that's a beautiful thing. I'm sure it's hard, but to even think about. But it's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's challenging. I still have challenges. I still get, my dad, he's serving life in prison. He calls maybe every 3 days, maybe longer, depends on when he's allowed to use the phone. And a lot of people wonder, like, well, why do you still talk to your dad? And I'm like, it's easier said than done looking on the outside. You got to remember, like, this is the guy that raised me. You know, um, he still maintains his innocence, but it's like I can't go from one day to the next thinking like, oh, this is my dad. Now he's a monster. Like, which is it's very confusing, very complex. It's things that and people ask, in all transparency, like, hey, do you think he done it? And I'm like, well, I as a realist, looking at the evidence, sitting through the trial, I'm like, it's a lot of things that came out that does not look good, not in full transparency, but it was no smoking gun. When I say that, everything was circumstantial evidence. It wasn't like, hey, I saw him, you know, take your, but they did have a co-defendant who was involved, and he gave a testimony testifying against my dad, saying he was, he did everything, he orchestrated everything, and they basically gave him the charge. Initially, they charged them both with second-degree murder and conspiracy. But later they dropped the conspiracy for both and charged him second degree. And based on the co-defendant's testimony, they they let him go. They gave him time served and just charged him with think it was, I think the formal term was like accessory to something like that.
So
But
they how did they get to him? Was he in prison for something else at the time?
no, interesting story, and I'll make it quick. But when at the crime scene, when my mother was found in her car, one of the pieces of evidence was a cigarette butt. Back then, DNA wasn't, prevalent. I forget what year DNA actually came out, but they later retested this cigarette butt, and I don't know. Yeah, that's what it was. So they retested, and he was already in the system for some other crime or whatever. But he has a twin brother, so the DNA match hit for both individuals, and they found this guy homeless under a bridge in Atlanta. That's where he was found, and they extradited him back to Louisiana. And one of the statements he made in the interview was that he was the key to it all. And he testified during trial, and the rest is history. But it all started from a cigarette butt, to answer your question.
Oh my gosh. All from a cigarette butt.
Cigarette butt that was found right outside the car. Yep.
Wow. Well, this is some process you've gone through. It's almost at a loss for words for it. But the show is called Uncorking a Story, and we do feature conversations with with authors, and this was certainly one heck of a story to uncork. I am curious, like what advice would you give somebody who is looking to get their story on paper and write their memoir? What would you tell them?
I would say, just like anything else, you have to start somewhere. A lot of times in life we think about all the things we don't have or all the resources we don't have. You have to take what you have, and you just have to start the process. And I say that, I don't want to make it sound easy, but that's what I did throughout my life. I took the cards that I were dealt, and I realized that it's life after trauma. So, I wasn't given this perfect, I'm not a card player, so I don't want to use a card analogy, but I wasn't given a perfect royal flush, if you will, or whatever, the perfect hand would be. My cards are all messed up, and, I took what I had and just made the best out of it, and just, said, I'm going to get to work and be better. So I would share that if you have a story, especially like the messy story. I refer to that in my book. Like, we got to tell the messy stuff, because this is the stuff people want to hear. People want to hear, like, how do you overcome? We don't want to hear, oh, you were raised with your parents were millionaires and now you're a billionaire. Yeah, that's great. But these are the real stories. Like, how do people really make it through life? Because the majority of people, we're normal. And when I say normal, like, I don't know what the percentage of billionaires, whatever. It's like I'm an everyday person. I just built a successful career and family despite the tragedies that I'm surrounded by.
Yeah, and I think that's a big story in and of itself. How you were able to do that. Do you address that at all in the book? In terms of kind of working, having this success in life in spite of your past?
Yes, I do. I talk about that throughout, and it's really just to sum it up. It just, I hate to, but like I kind of mentioned earlier, nobody else really cares. It's all up to you, and, I'm a big believer in my faith. and I just like just put my head down and just got to work, and like I mentioned earlier, my motivation was the things that I didn't have and the things that I wanted to achieve. Because I'm gonna be honest, Michael, I don't know if, if my life was perfect, and I say perfect in reference to what happened, but like if this tragedy didn't happen, if like my mom and dad were still together, I don't know if I'll be the same man that I am today. I don't know. One of the learnings and environment that I was raised in was I was raised to survive, not live. That's how my dad raised me. It's a lot of things. It's a lot of positive that come from that. It's a lot of negative. My wife always coaches me on, you need to be more emotional and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't, I didn't have that TLC, right? One of the things I reference in the book, it's a chapter called, I Love You. And that's really referring to, the connection, the emotional connection my dad and I had. He never really said, I love you. And it's amazing. It's putting that one word in front of that, amazing the difference that it makes, right? Versus, I love you. It's kind of like, I love you, but it's like a but versus saying, I love you. So that was the environment, so, I grew up fast, if you will.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Where can people pick up the book, Reggie?
So it'll be available Amazon, Barnes & Noble's website as well. And also, I have a pre-order being available April 8th at rlreed.com. That's my website. So I will have pre-orders and a signed edition available, hardback copies available starting April 8th. But the official release date is May 21st. And it'll be available via Amazon and other book outlets. But I say Amazon because mostly people, when you want to get something, you just go to Amazon. But it will be available barnesandnoble.com. But people will have access to purchase it.
All right. So I will be sure to put a link to rlreed.com in our show notes for people to look up, as well as a link to the book on Amazon and some other outlets. The book is The Day My Mother Never Came Home. The author is Reggie Reed. Reggie, thank you for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Thank you, Michael. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.